Did everybody get the schedule? We got everyone got that? So just a quick word here. We will meet next week, the 13th. We are actually going to transition. So today we're doing chapter 5. We've already covered chapter 3 and chapter 6 together. And so next week, we are going to transition into the prophetic half of the book of Daniel. So we've been covering pretty much the narrative half. Chapters 1 through 6 are the stories about Daniel. Chapters 7 through 12 are the prophecies by Daniel. And so we're going to, next week, get into the prophetic half. And you're going to see that we're going to really slow down. Not that we've been going that fast anyway. But chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, we're going to spend multiple weeks on these because there's just so much in there, and we don't want to miss all the good stuff. So next week we'll start in Daniel chapter 7 and the little horn. And don't forget, the 27th we won't have class. We'll take the week off for Christmas, and then we'll be back the following week. So again, just a reminder, the book of Daniel is divided into two halves. So we'll finish up. We'll close out the narrative half this week. We'll enter into the prophetic half next week. And just to review, book of Daniel is written in two languages. What are the languages? Hebrew and Aramaic. And we talked about how these two languages form the second layer of literary structure in the book of Daniel, forming this double chiasm where we have 2 through 7 that are in Aramaic, 8 through 12 that are in Hebrew, and in each of these we find repeating layers. So 2 and 7 match, 3 and 6 match, 4 and 5 match. And so we are looking at chapter 5 today, and remember, it's the centermost part of the chiasm that is given the most emphasis. So we're the emphasis, the big message here in this Aramaic portion deals with what's going to happen to these wicked kingdoms that are reigning. What's going to happen to Babylon? What's going to happen to the king of Babylon? And last week we looked at option 1, plan A, right? There's a message that comes to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar at first does not humble himself, but he eventually is humbled at least. And his heart is humbled. He honors and glorifies God, and the kingdom is restored to him. We'll see the opposite of that happening in chapter 5, where Belshazzar, Daniel's going to tell him he could have learned from all of this. He could have made a different choice. He could have humbled himself as Nebuchadnezzar did, but he did not. And so the kingdom is going to be taken from him, and it's going to come to an end. So we see kind of these two options of what could the fate be of these wicked kingdoms as they are reigning. I know we've talked about this quite a bit. Do you guys feel like you've got a good handle on this structure? You understand it and kind of see how the parts relate to one another? Kind of, yes, a little bit.
This chapter is not a story, but it's written in Aramaic because it's about the nations, right?
Right. Okay, so this is a good point, and we'll talk about this more next time. But notice the two layers of Daniel don't divide in the same place, right? So chapters 1 through 6 are narrative, 7 through 12 are prophetic, but chapter 7, that is the first chapter in this prophetic section, is the last chapter in the Aramaic section. And we'll talk about this more next time, but chapter 7 actually is kind of a hinge in the book of Daniel, where it kind of overlaps these. It's at that overlapping place between these two literary structures. So they largely are the same, but the endpoints are a little bit different, especially in chapter 7. So good question. Any other questions or comments just about this? All right, we'll come back to it. So again, remember the central problem of the book of Daniel. The unfaithfulness of God's people has caused them to be exiled from their kingdom and allowed wicked kingdoms to reign over them. So today, we're going to look at how God is dealing with these wicked kingdoms and what happens. So, before we look at Daniel chapter 5, we need to first understand the historical context, because we're going to see that the turn of events in Daniel chapter 5 is very unexpected. And part of the reason that it's so unexpected is that Daniel 5 really happens at a time when Babylon is near its height of power. We know a fair bit about the city of Babylon and the empire of Babylon from records we have from Persian and later Greek historians. And the walls of Babylon, the city of Babylon, seemed inconquerable. Like this city was going to reign and dominate for generations and generations to come. And we're gonna talk about this a little bit. But let me just kind of give a brief outline. So this is a modern reconstruction of the one of the walls. I think this is the inner wall of Babylon. This is in Iraq. And the walls of Babylon are ancient Greek historians, so like Strabo, Herodotus, others. They gave these accounts of what Babylon was like before it was destroyed. And some say that the walls of Babylon were 80 feet thick.
Wow.
Now just imagine. Now that's probably an exaggeration. Strabo, the Greek historian, he puts it more like 20 feet thick. And what he says is that 2 4-horse chariots could race each other on top of the inner wall of Babylon. Okay? So you imagine 2 chariots, 4 horses, they're side by side racing each other, and that's not the entirety of the wall. Babylon, the city of Babylon had multiple layers of walls. And these would have been walls that were baked brick on the outside. So they're casement walls, baked brick on the outside. And the inside, they would be filled with packed dirt and rocks. And remember the way that warfare worked at that time. If an enemy is coming, everybody goes inside the city. That's your safe haven, that's your protection. All the surrounding villages and farmers and things, everybody goes inside the city for safety. The army comes, they lay siege to the city, so they set up camp, they surround the city, and they're going to try to break through the walls. So if your walls are 20 feet thick, minimum, you've got multiple layers of walls. It's going to take them a long time to break through. While they're trying to break through, you're shooting arrows at them, you're throwing rocks at them, you're throwing firebrands on their head, and eventually you hope that they will die or get tired and give up and go away, and you will be safe. So what I want to do is go with you to the book of Daniel in Time and Context, page 260. We're going to read some pieces from an account by Herodotus of the fall of Babylon. Did you guys get a chance to read this beforehand? Look at you, studious people. All right. And maybe I should just say something about Herodotus. So Herodotus was a Greek Persian. He had a lot of Persian experience and influence and where he lived. Historian. He is known as the father of history. So where did I put that book? Oh, you've got it. All right. So this is Herodotus's histories, and he was really the first person that we know of to write history as we think of it in a modern sense. Like somebody is writing a historical account like you'd read in a history book. And you can see he wrote quite a lot, primarily about the Greek and Persian wars, but he was a fan of Cyrus and spent a bit of time researching and finding sources on what happened to Babylon and how Cyrus came to power. And so what we have here, does everybody see where we're at? Page 260 is Herodotus' account about Cyrus and the fall of Babylon. We also have a very similar account from another historian called Xenophon, who wrote something called a Chiropedia or Cyropedia, which is his account of basically the story of Cyrus. We'll talk a little bit more about Cyrus in a bit. And Xenophon's account is very similar to Herodotus. So let's start.
Is this before Wikipedia?
Yes, this is before Wikipedia, way before. But the Cyro or Chiropedia. Let's start. Let's just read that first paragraph. Would you read it for us, Renee?
Okay. Cyrus was the first approach of the ensuing spring marched forward against Babylon. The Babylonians encamped without their walls, awaited his coming. A battle was fought at a short distance from the city, in which the Babylonians were defeated by the Persian king, whereupon they withdrew within their defenses. Here they shut themselves up and made light of his siege, having laid in a store of provisions for many years in preparation against this attack. For when they saw Cyrus conquering nation after nation, they were convinced that he would never stop and that their turn would come at last.
Okay, so this is very interesting. Cyrus is the leader of the Persians, who are also now joined by the Medes. We don't have time to tell that whole story. Cyrus's origin story is quite amazing, and we can read about it in Xenophon and other places, and probably a little embellished for sure, but the way that he comes to power is quite startling, and he is leading this coalition of the Persians and the Medes. Remember, it was a coalition of the Babylonians and the Medes that had overthrown the Assyrians. And now the Medes, who are a little further east, so you think about Babylon is in Iraq, the Medes and the Persians are modern-day Iran, so east of Iraq. The Babylonians and Medes had overthrown the Persians. Now the Medes are united. The Babylonians and the Medes had overthrown the Assyrians. Sorry, I'm confusing. And now the Medes have united with the Persians and are coming after Babylon. The Babylonians have seen this. There's been a battle outside of the city. The Babylonians were defeated in that battle, and they've withdrawn inside the city. Now, they knew this was coming. They knew that eventually Cyrus and the Persians and the Medes were going to be against them. So Herodotus says that they had made provision for many years. Some accounts say that they had 20 years worth of food stored up in the city. And just imagine 20 years worth of food. So they know this is coming. Not only do they have 20 years worth of food, but remember the way that a siege works is you surround the city and you try to get through the walls, but if you can't get through the walls, you can just strangle the city, meaning people can't get out to get food, they can't get out to get water, and if they run out of food and water, they're going to surrender, right? And you'll be able to conquer the city. This is why Hezekiah, when the Assyrians are coming, he digs the pool, his tunnel, from the pool of Siloam underneath the city, this tunnel that goes under the ground that brings water from the outside inside, so that when the Assyrians come and surround the city, they've got water. Because you can go for a while without food, but not very long without water. Well, the Babylonians had a real advantage in that their city was situated right on top of a source of water. Does anybody know what river this is here? Not the Tigris, Euphrates, yes. So Babylon was situated right on top of the Euphrates River, which of course was very convenient for a number of things. They used it to irrigate their crops, they made canals, and so they had plenty of water for farming. It was a source of transportation for trade. Boats would go up and down the Euphrates, bringing trade goods. But then also the way the city was built, and this is an artist's rendition. We don't know exactly how it looked. But from Herodotus' account and other places, we know that the Euphrates ran through the city of Babylon, and that there were gates when the river entered into the city. There was a gate that allowed water to go in, but kept enemies and people out. And on the other side, when the river exited, there was another gate that allowed water to leave, but kept enemies out, right? So that meant if they had enough food, they had an unlimited supply of water, right? So 20 years food, unlimited supply of water, they can wait out for a long time. And just think about laying siege to a city for 20 years. These soldiers, they might start as, young men, but they're going to be old men by Babylonian standards by the time, the Babylonians are starting to get hungry. Yeah. This is and for those 20 years, you've got to feed the army on the outside. So this is, the Babylonians are feeling pretty confident about their ability to withstand the siege. By the way, this is a side note, but the book of Ezekiel mentions a siege by Nebuchadnezzar against the city of Tyre. That siege lasted 12 years, and Nebuchadnezzar actually gave up after 12 years. And the book of Ezekiel talks about God giving Nebuchadnezzar his wages that he didn't get when he laid siege to the city of Tyre because it was unfruitful, it was unsuccessful. So Cyrus comes. The Babylonians are shut up inside the city. They've got lots of food. They've got unlimited supply of water. The walls are thick. And the city is actually very expansive. And so to be able to completely surround the city, he has to spread out his men quite a bit because it's such a large city.
You can see why they felt quite confident.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had everything they needed. And isn't that a ziggurat that you were talking about?
Yes, that's a ziggurat.
Week?
So you can see that there, this stepped pyramid, and at the very top would be the temple. That would be a ziggurat to Marduk, the temple.
And all this smoke that's rising might be their offerings, maybe?
Offerings, or just cooking, blacksmith, all those sorts of things. It was a bustling city, a very active city. So, if you're Cyrus and you don't want to wait 20 years to conquer the city, what do? Oh, and by the way, I should just mention this. We know the exact date of when this happens. So this is October 12th, 539 BC. We know this not from the Bible, but from other historical sources. October 12th, there's a festival that the Babylonians are celebrating. This, by the way, is right around the time of the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles for the Jews. This is in the fall of the year, October 12th of 539. The Babylonians are inside. They're making light of the threat on the outside, and they are not feeling very afraid. All right, so let's read a little bit more here. Will you read that next paragraph for us, Renee?
Cyrus was now reduced to great perplexity as time went on, and he had made no progress against the place. In this distress, either someone made the suggestion to him, or he bethought himself of a plan, which he proceeded to put into execution. He placed a portion of his army at the point where the river enters the city, and another body at the back of the place where it issues forth, with orders to march into the town by the bed of the stream, as soon as the water became shallow enough. He then himself drew off with the unwarlike portion of his host, and made for the place where Nitocristinati dug the basin for the river, where he did exactly what she had done formerly. He turned the Euphrates by a canal into the basin, which was then a marsh, on which the river sank to such an extent that the natural bed of the stream became fordable.
Okay, so this is quite the feat. So Cyrus leaves his army, his soldiers around the city, but those who are with him who aren't soldiers. So you would have had a lot of people who are cooking food and hauling gear and, who are doing the other kind of logistics sorts of things for his soldiers. He has them go and they start digging a canal. There's this low, depressed area, this kind of basin that is adjacent to the Euphrates River. They start digging a canal between the Euphrates in this lower area, and once it's completed, it allows the water to go out of the Euphrates and into this basin area, and that basin area becomes a marsh, right? It becomes a swamp, and now the river level lowers, and his men can start marching up the bed of the Euphrates into the city of Babylon. Now, I'll just mention one other thing here very quickly. Herodotus names this woman Nitocristinati, and how she had dug the basin for the river. We don't know exactly what that is, but in other places, Herodotus talks about this Nitocristinati as being a queen mother of Babylon. In fact, we're going to see in Daniel 5 the appearance of a queen mother. And according to Herodotus, Nitocristinati was the wife of Nabonidus. We'll talk about who that was in just a bit. The wife of Nabonidus, and possibly the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, who we have met before. So she's this queen. She's known, according to Herodotus, for her building accomplishments there in Babylon. So she's like a queen regent. So even though she's a queen, she's exercising some sort of reign and rule and authority. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. All right, you guys with me so far? Yes, no, kind of. All right, so now Cyrus has figured out how to deal with the river, but remember that river passed through these gates that allowed the water in but kept the soldiers out. So what's going to happen? So let's read. Well, why don't you just read the remaining part of this for us, Renee?
Starting here at the bottom?
Yep.
Hereupon the Persians who had left for the purpose at Babylon by the river's side entered the stream, which had now sunk so as to reach about midway up to a man's thigh, and thus got into the town. Had the Babylonians been apprised, is that where it goes?
Yep.
Yeah. Had the Babylonians been apprised of what Cyrus was about, or had they noticed their danger, they would never have allowed the Persians to enter the city, but would have destroyed them utterly, for they would have made fast all the street gates which gave access to the river, and mounting upon the walls along both sides of the stream would so have caught the enemy as it were in a trap. But as it was, the Persians came upon them by surprise, and so took the city. Owing to the vast size of the place, the inhabitants of the central parts, as the residents as Babylon declare, long after the outer portions of the town were taken, knew nothing of what had chanced. But as they were engaged in festival, continued dancing and reveling until they learnt about the capture. Such then were the circumstances of the first taking of Babylon.
Okay. So they march along the riverbank and the gates are open. Herodotus says, for whatever reason, he doesn't know, but the Babylonians were careless, is kind of how Herodotus puts it. And they find the gates open, which means that the Persians and the Medes can just walk right into the city, unnoticed, because everybody in the city is partying for this festival. So they walk into the city. The city is so big that even as they're entering into the city and there's noise, people on farthest parts of the city, they don't know what's going on. And so they just walk into the city, and in one night, just think about this, the city of Babylon falls. They were ready for a 20-year siege, and in one night, they come to an end. It's startling. It's absolutely startling. Okay, so before we go to Daniel 5, we need to look at Isaiah 44 and this prophecy about Cyrus. Did you all have a chance to read this on your own? Mm-hmm. Okay. So remember, Isaiah is a prophet. He prophesied primarily during the rule of the Assyrians, when the Assyrians were the dominant power. He is prophesying about 150 years before all of this is taking place. And we're going to read quite a startling prophecy.
How many years before?
About 150 years.
Okay, and what verse? Because it's 699 or 700, depending.
700. We'll start in verse 24.
24.
Of Isaiah 44.
And go to.
All right. Let me see here. Let's just read through the end of the chapter, and then we'll read some verses in 45.
Okay. Thus says the Lord your Redeemer, and he who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord, who makes all things, who stretches out the heavens all alone, who spreads abroad the earth by myself, who frustrates the signs of the babblers and drives diviners mad, who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolishness, who confirms the word of his servant and performs the counsel of his messengers, who says to Jerusalem, you shall be inhabited, to the cities of Judah you shall be built, and I will raise up your waste places, who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers, who says to the Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. Well, that's pretty specific, isn't it?
Yeah, very specific. So notice a couple things here. One, God says, I am frustrating the signs of the babblers.
Yes.
Now, isn't that an interesting word in this context, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about Babylonians. What does the word Babylon mean? Confusion. So it's using this term for confusion or babbling. I'm going to frustrate the signs of the wise men, the prophets of Babylon. Mm-hmm. It's not what they say that's going to come to pass. It's going to come to pass, but what I say is going to come to pass. I'm the one who knows and holds and controls the future. Right? So he's gonna frustrate them, and he says, I'm going to drive the diviners mad, which I think is very interesting. I'm going to confirm my word. He's saying this to Jerusalem when it's waste, right? But I will raise up your waste places. Jerusalem shall be inhabited. Notice verse 27. Who says to the deep, be dry. I will dry up your rivers. Okay, is this fitting the historical context of what we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. God is prophesying that he's going to frustrate the wise men of Babylon, that Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. Remember, it's Babylon that's decimated Jerusalem. It's carried the people captive. Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt and re-inhabited. God's going to dry up this river. Who says of Cyrus, so he names Cyrus by name, he is my shepherd. And shepherd in this context means someone who is ruling or leading a people, right? He is my shepherd. He shall perform all my pleasure. Saying, so this is what Cyrus is going to do. He's going to say to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. And we'll talk about this when we get to Daniel 9 and some other places. But Cyrus gives a decree that allows, after he conquers Babylon, he gives a decree that allows the Jews to go back and to begin rebuilding, laying the foundation of the temple, re-inhabiting Jerusalem. All right. So that's pretty cool so far, right?
Yeah,
you guys see how this is being fulfilled? Notice with me chapter 45, verse 1. Let's read 1 and 2.
Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut.
Read verse 2 for us as well.
I will go before you and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of bronze and cut the bars of iron.
Okay, so remember, Cyrus gets into the city, his men get into the city, and these gates that allow access for the river are open. And his men are just able to walk right into the city. Herodotus says, I don't know how it happened. Maybe the Babylonians were just really careless and they didn't feel threatened. But Isaiah said, God's going to go ahead, right? So, I don't know how God does this. Maybe an angel is going and, pulling out his keys and unlocking all the doors. I don't know what happens, but God is the one who made sure it would happen so that Babylon would fall, as God said. Now, did you have a question or a comment?
Possibly you already addressed this when I wasn't here, but when was this predicted? When did Isaiah write this?
So this is about, Isaiah is like 800 BC or so. This is like 150 years before the time of Daniel and all of this happening. So Cyrus is called by name. We need to mention one other thing here. Notice the adjective in 45:1. Thus says the Lord to his right hand, but before that, anointed, right? Is that what does your translation say anointed? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, remember in the ancient world, kings, when they're inaugurated, this is especially true in Jerusalem and Judea, but even other places, when they are inaugurated, they are anointed, right? That's kind of, we think of a king being crowned, but really in the ancient world, in the ancient Middle East especially, kings were anointed. That's how they were inaugurated. So that term anointed also carries meaning, though, for the Jews. Do you remember what the word in Hebrew is for anointed? Does anybody remember? In Greek, the word is Christ or Christos. That means anointed. In Hebrew, the word is Messiah. Mm-hmm. So when Jesus, Christ is not the last name of Jesus, it's the title, right? Jesus, the anointed one. Jesus, the Messiah. And the reason that this term Messiah came to mean kind of the long-awaited one is that God promised to David that one of his descendants would sit on the throne there in Jerusalem forever. And so the Jews were waiting for this anointed king to come, to be the one who would reign, who would overthrow their enemies. And Jesus is going to, of course, be that son of David who sits on the throne, who reigns. But notice, God is using messianic language. That's what in Isaiah 45:1, when you read that word anointed in Hebrew, it's Messiah. He's using messianic language to refer to Cyrus. Now, it's not saying that Cyrus is the Messiah, is the one, but it's likening him, I think, to the Messiah. Now, Cyrus is not a believer in Yahweh. We read in the Cyrus Cylinder, he worships Marduk. And in fact, he sees as his mission when he goes to Babylon, he is restoring Marduk worship. Nabonidus, we don't really have time to get into all that, was a worshiper of the moon god Sin, and he had really promoted the worship of the moon god to the detriment of Marduk. People in Babylon weren't too happy about that, so Cyrus comes in. He says, hey, I'm a champion of Marduk. So Cyrus is not a believer in Yahweh, and yet God is likening him to a Messiah. Because what's he doing? He's coming. He's overthrowing the reign of wickedness, right?
Yes.
The oppressive kingdom that is oppressing God's people is going to be overthrown. God's people are going to be set free and allowed to return to their kingdom. And we're going to see that that is a very messianic expectation. Mark.
Who was Cyrus in a historical context? Was he a military leader?
Okay.
Was he a king?
Yeah. So Cyrus is a... you'll have to go back and read the story of Cyrus sometime. It's great. It's like it's like a novel. So Cyrus is this child of the king of the Medes, but there was a marriage between the king of the Medes and his daughter. The king has a dream, and he sees his daughter giving birth to a flood. And he takes it to mean that Cyrus is going to rule everything and conquer everything. And so he tries to kill Cyrus as a child. There's a long story about how that doesn't happen. His servant that he asks to kill Cyrus doesn't kill him, gives him to a family to take care of. And ultimately, Cyrus comes back to power and is seen as kind of this, in some ways, almost like a Moses sort of figure, right?
Sounds like you're describing Moses.
Yeah. It's kind of this, almost like this sense of like fate or destiny, rags to riches kind of story. And we're not sure exactly which details have been embellished, but he comes on the scene, and he is able to unite the Medes and the Persians together, and now he's leading this new coalition as king of the Medo-Persian Empire, as they're really their first kind of king. So good question.
Prophecy does what this is doing often, where it has a double meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It can be an actual story, but it also points to another story. Later on that happens, which you're going to tell us about later, I know.
Well, and just think about the messianic implications. Is Jesus going to come, and we'll talk about this when we get to Revelation 16, is Jesus going to come and overthrow the reign of wickedness on the earth?
Yes.
And establish a new kingdom where God's people will live in freedom to serve him and worship him? Yeah, that's what he's going to do, right?
Yes.
That's what the second coming, that's what it is. It's this, it's this reversal, and finally things will be just and God will reign again on the earth. And so in that sense, we can really see how Cyrus is this precursor to Jesus. He's not the Messiah, but he is kind of pointing the way to the Messiah, even though, as far as we know, he never worships Yahweh or has an understanding of who the true God is. Yes, Jason.
Now the Jews would have known.
Yes.
And do we have any knowledge of him knowing that he had tipped off or anything?
Yeah, so this is the question I want to ask when Jesus comes. Because Daniel was a student of the Old Testament. Daniel knows this, and Daniel is serving not only in the Babylonian court, but when the Persians take over, he serves in the Persian court.
Yes.
And so, did Daniel ever have a chance to have a conversation with Cyrus and say, hey, look, did you know that you have been serving Yahweh and appointed by him? I don't know. I hope so. My mind really likes to think about that. But we don't have any, not that I know. I don't know of any account of that taking place. But I think that would be really interesting to know. Yes, Wayne.
Second Chronicles 33.
Yeah.
Also talks about the prophecy of Cyrus.
Mm-hmm.
But something interesting he says is by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. So Jeremiah talked about these 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that Daniel knew about that.
Yes, exactly.
It's a good possibility he knew that Cyrus would be the one.
Mm-hmm.
Someone named Cyrus anyway.
Bring him back to Jerusalem.
Yeah, you wonder, were there smudge prints on Daniel's Bible at Isaiah 44 and 45 because he just read this over and over and was just waiting for this to happen?
Was he like you?
Yeah, I mean, you could. There's certain places you can see some smudge prints in my Bible. So we could spend a little more time on this, but I want to keep going and get to Daniel 5 and ultimately get to Revelation. But you can see how this idea of Babylon, this mighty, wicked empire, falling in a single night, unexpectedly, not only has a lot of meaning right then and there for the Jews of that time, but carries with it symbolism that will be used later on. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, let's very quickly go to Daniel 5.
I was thinking, there's a text, I think it's in John, that says, I'm telling you these things before they happen.
Yes.
So that when they do happen, you'll know. Do you know what, off the top of your head? I don't have my phone to look it up.
These things,
I think it's John something.
it's in the teens. I could find it. I want to go to Daniel 5 right now, but maybe we'll come to that later. All right, Daniel 5, October 12th, 539 BC. Let us read verses 1 through 4.
Belshazzar the king, that's on page 861, by the way. Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. And while he tasted the wine, Belteshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron and wood and stone.
Okay, we'll pause right there. So remember, Herodotus, Xenophon agrees with this. While Cyrus is outside the city of Babylon, digging this canal, getting ready to lower the river, what are all the Babylonians doing? They're partying, right? And this is exactly what Daniel says. That there's this feast, this festival. He's got 1,000 of his lords, and Belshazzar is there partying with all of them. Now, let me just mention very quickly about who Belshazzar is. If you had done much reading about the book of Daniel by commentators, maybe, let's say 100 years ago, one of the things that critics would have said is, we know that Daniel was not really in Babylon when he wrote this book. He couldn't have been there when Babylon fell because he didn't even know who the last king of Babylon was. We know from our records that Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon, and yet we read in Daniel 5 that Belshazzar, according to Daniel, is the last king of Babylon. Daniel got it wrong, so he must not have been there when it happened. There's a lot of ink spilled about this sort of thing. And it's true that the reigning king officially in Babylon, at the fall of Babylon, was Nabonidus, who is Belshazzar's father. But what those historians who criticized Daniel didn't know and couldn't have known was why Nabonidus was not there in Babylon. So archaeologists dug up something called the Babylonian Chronicle. You can see a portion of it here on the screen. And the Babylonian Chronicle tells us that Nabonidus was a big promoter of the worship of sin. Now that's sin not in the Hebrew sense of transgression, but it's the name of the moon god. And Nabonidus was a big promoter of sin, the moon god, but this upset the people in Babylon, especially the priests and many others who were faithful worshipers of Marduk. And because of the tension, this religious tension, Nabonidus actually leaves Babylon. And he sets up a sort of proxy capital in a place called Tema. There's this kind of oasis out in the middle of nowhere, out away from Babylon, far away. And he leaves Belshazzar, his son, to act in charge as his proxy, right? So even though he's really the king, the crown prince is going to act as king because the real king has left. Because he's going to go and worship sin, and he's not going to stay here in Babylon. Which is really interesting because if Daniel had written about the fall of Babylon hundreds of years later, he would have thought, along with everybody else, that Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon. But because he was there, he knew that Belshazzar was actually the one on the throne in the palace at the time that Babylon fell. All right. So Belshazzar, he's having this feast. The Persians and the Medes are outside. He brings in, notice what he brings in, the vessels from the temple of God in Jerusalem. Now, why is he doing this? Do they just like run out of clean dishes and, he's like, we got to use something. Why is he doing this? It's spite, right? And he's making a statement. There is a nation literally at his door trying to conquer him. And what he's going to do is bring out vessels from a god and a nation whom he has conquered, right? And he's praising his gods and saying, we're not people who are conquered, we are people who conquer others, right? So there's kind of this proud, boastful, spiteful, in-your-face God, in-your-face Medes, in-your-face Persians, nobody can touch us, we're on top of the world sort of thing. Now, from God's perspective, think about the sanctity of the temple in Jerusalem. Could just anybody waltz in there?
No.
Anytime, any way? Think about even the story of Uzzah when they're transporting the ark, right? They don't follow God's, they put it on a cart instead of carrying it like God had said. Uzzah reaches out, and it's a big deal, right? God doesn't say, oh, then, no, don't worry. I mean, the sanctity of the temple and the furnishings is a big deal to God. And here these vessels that were used in the temple are being used to arrogantly praise these idols. This is blasphemous, right? I mean, you can't get too much more blasphemous than this. And let me just point out one thing here. Notice, they're praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Now, have you seen that sequence of metals before? Bill's over here laughing. Bill, why are you laughing? Tell us.
The head of gold.
Yes.
That's the silver.
This is Daniel 2 all over again, right? Gold, silver, bronze, iron. And notice the very last thing is stone, right?
Yes.
I think this is a little wink, wink, hint, hint. What are they worshiping? Well, they're worshiping things that are about to be dust. These gods, that idol that Nebuchadnezzar worshipped was, yes, false gods, but really worshiping his kingdom. His kingdom, and not God's kingdom. And that's, Daniel 2 told us what's going to happen. And we're going to start to see that playing out. Okay, so verse 5, in the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So just put yourself there. Belshazzar's sandals. I mean, things are going great. You are the most powerful man in the world according to your eyes. I mean, everybody's, admiring your greatness, the greatness of your empire, praising these gods. Look whom we've conquered. And then all of a sudden, a hand, not a hand connected to a body, just a hand starts writing on the wall. And all of a sudden, people don't feel like partying anymore, right? The whole mood changes.
They probably wonder what was in that pint.
Yeah, we had too much to drink, and then well, it's not just me, you're seeing it too, right? And notice the language that's used to describe Belshazzar's response. So from one minute, he goes to this arrogant, nobody can touch us, take this God, we're going to rub it in your face. And then, countenance changed. Where does it say it?
Verse 6.
Yeah, verse 6. The joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked together. Right? He can't even stand up anymore. He's so scared. He's so taken back. And it's just a hand writing on a wall. I mean, it's just a vision. And just that vision alone is enough. I mean, really, the turning of the tables has started, right? He goes from this, arrogant, proud, boastful, to all of a sudden, he can't even stand up. He's just stricken with fear. And of course, we know the story. The wise men are brought in. They can't understand it. And then, remember I said that that piece about Nido-Crisnote? Remember what Herodotus said? She was the queen mother, Nabonidus' wife, which would be Belshazzar's mother. By the way, Nabonidus was not a son or a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He was from some other lineage. We think possibly the queen mother, Nido-Crisnote, was a descendant, a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, right? So when it calls Belshazzar Nebuchadnezzar's son, in the Hebrew, well, rather the Aramaic, it really can mean ancestor, descendant. It doesn't mean son, it could mean grandson or, something like that. And it's really probably through his mother's side, not through his father's side, Nabonidus' side. So she comes in, and what does she say to Daniel? To Belshazzar. Call Daniel. There is somebody in whom is the Spirit of God. So for her to recognize that, she must have been part or witness to some of the other things that have taken place that we've read about, right? She's heard these stories. She understands who Daniel is and that there's a different spirit in him.
In family history, of somebody who spent 7 years out eating
Yes!
grass. I don't think that's easily forgotten.
Right. Dad ate grass for 7 years. And absolutely, absolutely. So Daniel's brought in. Belshazzar says, I've heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you. And that this is verse 14. And the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. He says, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, this is 16, you shall be clothed with purple, have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be third ruler in the kingdom. Now, notice he doesn't promise him second ruler, because he himself is second ruler, right? But the highest position that he can bestow is third ruler in the kingdom. And I love Daniel's response. Will you read for us verse 16, Renee?
And I have heard of you, that you give interpretations.
Oh, sorry, verse 17.
And then Daniel answered and said, before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was in the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses.
And verse 22.
But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this.
Okay, so notice Daniel says, you can keep your gifts. That's not why I'm here. I mean, we really see the character of Daniel, right? I mean, Daniel, and it's kind of like, being made captain of a sinking ship, and Daniel realizes that, right? Like Daniel's like, no, I don't want any part of that. You can keep it. I know where all that's going. And then he preaches this sermon, and this is boldness, this courage, right? Nebuchadnezzar, your father, God humbled him. His heart was lifted up. His heart was proud. God humbled him, made him eat grass. And you knew all this. You knew all this. And have not humbled your heart. And then verse 22, he says, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Remember last time we talked about how this whole idea of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, Lucifer, lifting themselves up, pushing themselves up higher. Mm-hmm. We see the exact same attitude of pride and arrogance here in Belshazzar, and Daniel's calling it out. I mean, he is, he's not holding back. He's preaching this sermon right at Belshazzar and saying, you haven't humbled yourself. And he hasn't even gotten to the interpretation yet, right? I mean, he hasn't even, he's telling him the why of the message really before he tells him the message. And then he gets to the interpretation. Verse 25. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. And we should talk about this. Okay. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. You guys have the little footnotes down on the bottom here. If you're reading in Book of Time and Context, it's got the footnotes. Or I think even the other Bible, it should have the footnotes, which gives you the translation in Aramaic of what mene, mene, tekel, upharsin means.
What page?
259 in Book of Daniel and Time and Context. So mene, mene is 50 shekels. Really, literally what it means is 50 shekels, shekel, half shekel. So these are all forms of money. So it's kind of like saying dollar, quarter, nickel, or something like that, right? That's what's written up on the wall, dollar, quarter, nickel. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. But then Daniel goes on and gives a interpretation. What are the names of this money that's up there on the wall? And we'll see it's using kind of a play on words. God is kind of It's almost got a sense of humor here. I don't think it's really a laughing matter, but it's almost okay. So the word for mene, which means 50 shekels, literally means to number or to count, right? To number or to count. That's what the verb means. And Daniel says, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. So your days are numbered, right? Is how we would say it in English. Your days are numbered. This isn't going to go on forever. We're actually at the end. Your days are numbered. Your time is come to an end. So God has numbered your kingdom. Mene. Tekel, which means shekel. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. The word shekel literally means to weigh. And maybe we should just talk about this a little bit. So in the ancient world, this is before universal currency. And so the way that currency or money had value in the ancient world was not because, it's a quarter and it's got somebody's inscription on it. The way that money had value in the ancient world was by its weight. It's made of metal. Metal is valuable. And so if you're going to take your metal coins to purchase something, you go to the market and you will put your coins on a scale and they will be weighed on that scale, and that scale will determine the value of those coins that you hold. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this idea of being weighed in the balances and found wanting is using an imagery that was also prevalent in the ancient world of judgment. So, for instance, the ancient Egyptians believed that when you died, you would be judged. I think it was by Horus. I can't remember the name of the god that would judge you. And what would happen is your heart would be put on one end of a scale, and a feather would be put on the other side of the scale. And if your heart was heavier than the feather, then you're going to go to the bad place. If your heart is lighter than a feather, you're going to go to the good place. This is how they viewed the judgment taking place. And so scales in the ancient world were not only a part of trade, but they were symbols of judgment, right? Figuring out what is equitable, what is just. In fact, we do the same thing today, right? Mm-hmm. If you see a statue of Lady Justice, what does she have in her hands? She has, these scales. And so the same idea is happening. Tekel, which means to weigh, your kingdom has been weighed or judged and found wanting. It's not a righteous kingdom, it's an oppressive kingdom. You are not a righteous leader, you are a boastful, blasphemous, proud leader. And God is judging your kingdom. By the way, have we talked about what the word Daniel means? Does anybody know what the name Daniel means?
I know it.
You know it, and if I say it, you'll remember it. Yeah. Who said it? Yeah, that's what Daniel means. God is my judge. El means God. Dan, remember the tribe of Dan? That was, anyway. God is my judge. So judgment is a huge theme in Daniel. And judgment is not a bad thing according to the book of Daniel. Because if you are being oppressed, if wickedness is reigning, if there is injustice, and there is not accountability for evil that is taking place, what you long for, what you need is judgment, right? And so this is what Daniel is wanting. This is what God's people, David in the Psalms, is constantly crying out, praying for justice or judgment. And God is judging now, in this moment, the kingdom of Babylon and saying, your kingdom is judged and found wanting. All right. And then finally, mene, tekel, upharsin. And upharsin literally means a half shekel. The verb is from the verb to divide. So you think about dividing something in half. And this is really, it's kind of this clever wording because your kingdom has been numbered, it's been weighed, and now it's been divided, right? So it's been measured, it's been judged, and now here's the consequence. Your kingdom is going to be divided between the Medes and the Persians, right? And by the way, that word Upharsin or Perez, it is very similar to the word for Persian. So there's this kind of clever wording here. Your kingdom is going to be taken from you, and it's given to the Medes and to the Persians. All right, does everybody, any questions just about the words there and the interpretation, how Daniel interprets them? Does it make sense? Okay. So verse 29, Belshazzar gives the command. They put the purple and gold on Daniel. And then notice verse 30. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So Belshazzar, in just a matter of hours, top of the world, nobody can touch us, in your face, God, here's your vessels, and then the city of Babylon, which could have withstood a 20-year siege, in hours is overthrown and falls. Yes, Mark.
Okay, so I'm a little confused because I'm expecting you to say, and then
Cyrus.
received.
Yeah.
So why Darius?
So from what we can tell from history, Cyrus, even though he is there at the overthrow of Babylon, he does not stay in Babylon to administer, to be the administrator of Babylon right away. It seems like he goes and he continues to wrap up some military campaigns in other places, and then he's going to come back to Babylon later on. And so Darius, it's this kind of alliance between the Medes and the Persians. And remember, it's not just the Babylonian Empire now. It's you've got Persia and Babylon, this whole wide realm. They've conquered others. So Cyrus is kind of doing other things. Darius is going to administer the city of Babylon, and then Cyrus is going to come back at a later point. So, good question. All right. So what we should do now, in the little bit of time that we have left, are you guys ready to transition to the book of Revelation really quick? Do you have any other questions about Daniel 5 or comments about Daniel 5 and the history of how Babylon falls in a single night? Okay. Then let's do this. Let's go to Revelation. Let's start in chapter 18. Remember, Revelation is going to use a lot of language from the book of Daniel. You really can't understand Revelation without understanding the way that it takes ideas and wording and symbols from Daniel and uses them. And in Revelation, the Empire of Babylon is gone. It's, Iraq is kind of this, just ruins in this desert. There's no empire in Babylon. And yet, the language of Babylon reigning and oppressing is woven throughout the book of Revelation. Mm-hmm. And Babylon here in Revelation is not the literal empire of Babylon that reigned during Daniel's day, mm-hmm. but it's symbolizing this oppressive power that is confused and confusing from a religious perspective and is causing people to turn from God to the worship of human-created gods and ideas and things. So it's leading people, it's oppressing people, and it's leading them into religious confusion. Revelation 18 is all about the fall of Babylon. And I just want to read with you verses 9 and 10, just so you can see some of the connection here. And we looked at some of these verses, some verses from Revelation 18 last time, but let's look at verses 9 and 10. Will you read those for us, Renee?
The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her. when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come.
Okay.
You just said that
Yeah.
a minute ago.
Do you see the connection here, right? This mighty city, this powerful city, how could it ever be conquered? And boom, in 1 hour, the tables have been completely reversed, and it's judged, and it's come to an end. The Bible says this is the same sort of thing is going to happen, and actually it's going to be on a larger scale according to the book of Revelation. This Babylon in Revelation rules over the entire earth. All the earth are worshiping according to its commands, and the way it's forcing and persecuting people who don't line up with its ways. And yet, in 1 hour, the tables are going to be reversed, and it's going to fall and come to an end. Which tells me something in that we can hang on to hope even in the darkest moments, right? I mean, who would have thought, in the height of Belshazzar's arrogance, that a few hours later it could all be over for Babylon? But God, I mean, He can change things in a heartbeat. He doesn't work according to our power and according to our timing. And even though wickedness seems to be reigning and only getting stronger, it's all going to change. And the Bible says it's going to change quickly, that the end will come suddenly and quickly. Okay, go back with me a few pages. Revelation 16. So this is in the context of this is the last plagues that are being described. And I want to just look with you at the sixth plague here in verse 12 and 13. We'll probably jump down to verse 15 as well. Revelation 16. Are you guys all there? Yes? Okay. Will you read those for us, Renee?
You said verse 12.
12 and 13. Yep, Revelation 16.
Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet.
Okay. So notice the first part here. What's the river? Euphrates. Now, have we talked about this river before? Yes. Okay, the Euphrates. And what's going to happen to the Euphrates? It's going to be dried up, and the way prepared for who?
The kings of the east.
Kings from the east. Okay. Have we talked about a story where the Euphrates is dried up and we have kings? Remember, it's the Medes and the Persians. We've got Darius and Cyrus coming, by the way, Media and Persia, they are east of Babylon. So they're coming from the east. And what happens? Babylon's overthrown in a heartbeat, in a night. It comes to an end. Revelation is using that exact same imagery. I don't think Revelation is saying that the Euphrates River is literally going to be dried up again. I don't think that's what it's talking about. It's talking about this oppressive system at the end that is symbolized by Babylon, this oppressive religious system at the end that is causing all the world to worship falsely. It's going to be overthrown in the same way, meaning as quickly as Babylon was. Its end will come suddenly. And of course, that king from the east, it's not going to be Cyrus.
It isn't?
But it's going to be another messianic individual.
Yes, Messiah.
It's going to be Jesus, right? So in this way, Cyrus is prefiguring Jesus, the King of Kings, who's going to come. Babylon's going to be overthrown. God's people will be set free, and they will reign with him in his kingdom eternally. Notice verse 15. And in my Bible, that is red, which means who is speaking here? Jesus. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So this idea of his coming is quick, right? It's unexpected. And this is exactly how Cyrus's coming was for the Babylonians. Now, they could have been ready, but in their arrogance, in their pride, they weren't. So I'll just refer to one last text. Matthew 24. Why don't we just go there very quickly? Matthew 24. This is Jesus' sermon about the second coming.
960 is the page. 960.
All right, Matthew 24. And verse 38.
So that's 961.
So 37, Jesus says, as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Verse 38, for as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Does that sound kind of familiar too? What are they doing in Babylon? They're partying. They're ignoring the signs. They're ignoring the situation. In their pride and arrogance, they're saying, we don't have anything to worry about. Let's just party and celebrate, and boom, then comes the end. Now, Jesus has told us in Matthew 24, we can know that the end is near. We don't know exactly when, but we can know that the end is near. But those who the end is catching by surprise, they're looking at something very different, right? And they are living in the moment. They are, they're partying, and then they are surprised when the end comes suddenly. So all of this, what do we do with all this? How does this apply to us today? Well, the wicked nations are reigning and ruling, right?
Yes.
Wickedness is having its day on the earth. God's kingdom, his will is not being done on earth as it is in heaven. We can see that. But we also need to remember that this will not go on forever. That there will be a judgment, there will be accountability, that wrong will be made right. Meaning it will be there will be an end. There's an expiration date on evil. And we need to keep our focus on the right kingdom, on the right king, on what is important and what we should live for, and not get caught up with all the other stuff. Which is why, isn't it so good that we can come and do things like this? And remind ourselves that we do have a deliverer who's coming, Jesus, our Messiah, who is going to overthrow wickedness, who is going to reign, and we need to live for him and live for his kingdom and not for any other.